So I'm not hungover today, which is nice.
Lovely. That's always good.
Listeners, it was my birthday weekend, and yesterday was a little rough.
But you had a good time.
I had a great time. I dragged my friends, and both hosts included here, to karaoke. It was very fun.
Yeah, it was a blast.
I paid the price. I pulled a muscle trying to zip up my jumpsuit in the bathroom by myself. Even though I had help, I thought I could do it. And I couldn't.
You flew too close to the sun.
My knees hurt from like bouncing, which is how I dance, I guess. It's just bouncing my knees.
That's a tried and true move. You did more dancing
move
than I did, though. I was mostly seated and like just sort of weak sways back and forth. I'm not much of a dancer.
You held it down on the tambourine, though.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my first time playing tambourine.
I think I played triangle once in jazz band, and I would not recommend it again. It wasn't great. I want to say I did maracas at one point, too. I can't do rhythm instruments. Not my thing.
I think I would be bad at like full-on drum set drums, you know? Too much going on.
You did well on the tambourine, though.
Thanks. Okay, so we do need to get more than 5 minutes of academic content in here, so let's get to it.
Oh my God, that review killed me.
It's fine, like, different people like different things.
No, we're just going to read facts this week.
Just the facts.
Only facts. That's going to be really hard because this is another discussion episode.
Yeah, it's not just going to be facts. But there will be a lot of facts, actually. So let's get into it. Let's get into our topic here, a discussion about democracy, which we all know is under siege in America.
So I've heard.
Or it dies in darkness, or it does, it's really a dark time for democracy.
According to the CNN banner, what is it called? The ticker or whatever at the bottom. Mm-hmm. I bet they just have that saved as a file of just is democracy under attack again? All right, put that on there.
Yeah. But let's talk about it. What do people even mean when they say democracy? What should we be thinking about?
What is it? Give me a definition.
All right, definition of democracy. I'm sure it's contentious, right? Not everybody agrees, but just the bare bones here comes from the Greek. This is what you learn in school, right? It comes from the Greek demokratia, demos meaning the people, and then kratos meaning rule. So the rule of the people. So some form of government where the people have the authority to decide on the laws, or to deliberate on the laws, or to choose people to do that for them. So that's generally what we're talking about with democracy. That's very vague. That's very broad.
Mm-hmm. Because like you hinted at, by the people can mean lots of different things. Is it directly, we're voting on every single issue? Is it, we are going to tell these guys what we want and they're going to do it for us? There's a lot of different ways to do that.
Yeah. So one you just mentioned, let's just have someone else do it, right? It's called representative democracy, where you choose somebody, I think the cow poster that we must have alluded to in our first episode.
Yes, we did.
Said, you elect the best face for TV. And they go and, they tell you how to distribute the cow's milk.
That's right.
That representative democracy, you choose your leaders, and then they kind of are vested with power to enact legislation or change the laws, basically. However they told you they would, or their party would, or whatever. It kind of depends.
Or however they got paid to.
Yeah, and some countries do have party discipline and stuff. So they have to vote with their parties, and their parties kind of steer them to go do certain things. It's a little more organized. But yeah, in America, typically it's just who gave me campaign donations? What am I looking at poll numbers wise? That sort of thing.
Is that, okay, parliamentary is still technically representative, right? It's a different kind of representative?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just...
multi-parties, usually.
Parliamentary, when people say that, one thing they usually mean is you have a prime minister as your
Oh,
Leaders.
okay.
So you have a parliament, right? But what's the difference in that and in Congress? It's just like a term, except for parliament is the one that elects their prime minister, right? So you actually just vote for the parties, and then the party that gets the majority or that, is the biggest faction, generally they'll have an election in parliament to pick the prime minister, and then that's the leader of the government. And then you have like a separate head of state. Some places, like France, they have a president also. Some places, like, United Kingdom, they have like a monarch still. Whereas here, like the Congress, they do the legislative branch stuff, but they don't elect the head of state, the president. We do that indirectly through stupid electoral college shit.
Yeah, it's not real. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. We kind of already know what's bad about representative democracy as it stands today. Is there a scenario where that could be good?
Yeah. I mean, it would look radically different than...
Yeah, let's pretend it is. Let's pretend we could be like, there's no more money in campaigns. Like, we do some shit to make sure it's not like as completely corruptible as it is right now.
Okay.
What would that look like?
It would look like socialism.
Okay, yeah.
So under capitalism, what Marxists frequently call bourgeois democracy or liberal democracy or whatever, capitalist democracies, there's a lot of limitations, and you said we kind of know all of them, but like it ultimately runs up against the problem of interests. The ruling class, it's not in their interest to let the government like take them out of power. So you're essentially restricted to just nibbling at the edges of things. Because if you get too close, they're going to just stop you. All right, they're just going to get rid of that government. They're going to turn to fascism, like we talked about, or just suspend elections or do something else besides let you take power from them, through the democratic process.
Okay, so like let's make a concrete example of this. We wake up tomorrow, money has been taken out of politics. No more, campaign financing. Like that's just not a thing you can do anymore. Okay. You just vote and the guy wins. Whoever you voted for wins. And somehow we all elect really cool socialist people. So you're saying they would get up there to DC or wherever and they would be like, hey, we're going to provide XYZ for the people. This is what we were elected to do. And then like the healthcare companies would just be like, yeah, no, we're not. We're just going to ignore that.
That's a weird scenario, but like...
It's a very weird one on a lot of levels. A lot of weird shit has to happen.
Yeah, that's sort of an impossibility. But like, okay, let's run with it. You're assuming that we, return like a super majority of, some sort of socialist bloc of parties.
Yeah, we have a mandate from the people.
Yeah, to the House of Representatives and to the sclerotic Senate, which essentially means we have to like sweep the elections there because it's only one election cycle. It's only a third of the Senate that we got to vote in.
Yeah.
So we'd probably have to do this over two
cycles later. We got everybody in there.
And we got the president, whatever. At this point, we're really selling ourselves short. If we have that much of a mandate, we should honestly be in the Capitol in numbers and forcing a constitutional convention to get rid of the horrible straitjacket that we're in. But if you do want to restrict yourself and say, no, we're not going to do that. What could we do within this framework? Okay, whatever. Let's do that. I'm saying that if lawmakers and the president try to move beyond just social welfare programs, which I don't think they mind too much. They've done that before. All right, that's just social democracy, and you can do that off the backs of, your imperial possessions all over the world. You can do that. It's fine. I don't think they have a problem with that. They don't like it. They'll complain. They'll run reactionaries against you in the next election. If you go and say, well, we're going to nationalize whatever, like huge sectors of the economy.
We're going to nationalize, oil, the banks. We're going to stop that imperialism. Like, that ain't going to work. First off, that's a coup.
Yeah, that's when you're going to see some sort of coup, some sort of, assassinations on it. I mean, like they will resort to whatever. And
not us, Dave and Dan. Calm down.
No, we're saying that you guys, your factions, would find ways to, conveniently stumble across plenty of socialist politicians who had just conveniently fallen out of buildings and stuff. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the just the military is too powerful in this country to let its power get taken away.
That's another thing. Yeah, the military, if you challenge that, that does not go well for people usually. Now, hey, for the reformists out there, I mean, I hope you're right.
That'd be great.
If we did this and it didn't happen, I would be glad. I would record, we could record, keep doing our podcast, but just be like, man, you remember that time we were wrong?
Stupid.
Yeah, like we could do that. That'd be fine.
The we were dumbasses hour.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd have to eat all of our words essentially, because that goes all the way back to, Lenin versus what's his name? Bernstein, the reformist, and Kautsky and all those guys. And we would be just completely discredited, and that would be cool, but I just don't think it would happen.
I would love to be discredited in that particular way. That'd be great.
Yeah. Because it'd be so nice. It'd be so peaceful,
Oh, yeah. That'd be rad. Very hopeful.
So,
okay.
Yeah, here's hoping.
So let's say we go to the next kind of form, which is, I think, what a lot of people's gut instinct is to turn to when they're like, man, this representative thing just isn't working out. It seems to be inherently corruptible. What if it's direct democracy?
Okay, so direct democracy, you're looking at everyone directly voting or directly deciding on what the laws of the country or, well, whatever level you're at, right? They're directly making the laws themselves.
I think a lot of people's initial reaction to hearing that would be like, hey, I don't have time to vote on everything. So does this mean like you probably should have a smaller like area to work with? Like you're not voting on everything countrywide. Maybe there's some votes that you do countrywide, but like most of it would be more local.
Yes, yeah. If you're trying to implement it smartly anyway, direct democracy doesn't scale very well.
You'd spend all day voting.
Right, like, and voting about things that you increasingly know. Yeah, increasingly you don't know much about, or maybe it doesn't affect you as much. Like, how do I know whether something, a new facility should be built in Minnesota? Like, kind of far away, So yeah, you run into that problem. It's really good, I think, when applied at the local level. We'll see some examples of that today. But as you get up, it's not to say you can't do any direct democracy when you go up to higher, nation level or whatever. But it has to be on just things that like, hey, we want to be on the same page about this. What are we going to, like a referendum sort of thing.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, that was going to be the second pitfall I see people mention a lot is like, there's this idea of people have to be informed in order to vote. Like, you can't just be making decisions based on nothing. And if you do direct democracy, like, how do we know? Like there's this idea of like, oh, this guy's smart, so he should be in charge,
Yeah, and that's something that I think we saw in Malatesta's writing, was he was kind of saying, look, if people are uninformed about things, what is going to make it better for them to like, all pool together their uninformedness?
We're all dumb together.
Yeah, how is that going to make a better decision? And he's like, it's not really like, and that's a fair criticism, I think. So part of a functioning democratic system would be people need to have the ability to be informed about things.
So let's kind of put the same scenario up, but it's for direct democracy. Somehow we have switched to a direct democracy. Welcome, everybody. It's cool here.
Yeah, this is like fifth ed America, where just like a wizard gets a wish and just transforms everything immediately.
It's like the butterfly effect, but instead of like flapping its wings, you like had sex with the butterfly or something extreme.
or no, dude, like one of the World War I time travelers really went
really
wild.
Did some shit.
And
they put on like a one-man Broadway play, and everyone was like, "Wow."
And yeah, then years later, bam, direct democracy in America. All right,
that's all it takes, guys. Okay, so let's pretend that happened. Is there a way? Then does it face that same issue of representative democracy where like even if everybody voted for it and was on board with like dismantling capitalism, we'll probably run into the same issue, right?
No. Sort of. I mean, if you at that point you have the revolutionary masses, you at least have the masses that desire strong enough change to basically be trying to implement socialism through the ballot box. So the capitalists at that point know that, hey, we've either we can fight against this. They know that they're going to be provoking like a revolution, basically.
If we say no, some bad shit's going to happen.
Right? If everybody's participating in all this stuff, like that's the only, I guess you could still have low turnout. And so most people aren't voting.
You could still have low turnout. And then also just like the sheer amount of, I guess, wealth and power that some people have. They could maybe use that to fund their own little private armies and shit, you know?
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing is like they can totally still win a revolutionary conflict because they've got all this technology and shit. So
yeah, they got the drones.
So that's another kind of downside to that whole avenue.
To be fair, that's a downside to our avenue of just straight up revolution too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is revolution faces that, like, bleak prospect. But I guess you could still say that maybe there's the same level of support. The level of socialism is just channeled differently. So maybe that's not a big difference. Okay. If we're a direct democracy, do we have, like, a Congress at that point?
That's the thing. I think direct democracy requires such a radically different structure than we have.
It does, yeah.
That I don't even know if that applies. Like, I guess, like, in this imaginary world, a state, it could just be like, well, now Indiana is socialist, bye.
At that point, yeah, we essentially are running a commune or are running, like, a worker state. Kind of, like, because we have to decide on everything. How is it then carried out? You know, like.
It becomes like a territory kind of thing, or like a confederation. That's the word.
Yeah, this is a wild hypothetical.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Fruitful. All right.
Sorry, guys. Let's keep going. Okay, so I was looking through other types of democracy, and I wanted to ask questions about some of them.
Okay.
Because a lot of people have thought a lot about this.
Yeah, it's been around since, ancient Greece, so.
We've had some time to stew. All right. Some people think there should be like a lottery system where like, okay, now you get to run this thing. That seems crazy.
I mean, I know that they did this for some like political offices and stuff in ancient Greece. I don't know if it's had a lot of modern success. I haven't heard of it.
I mean, maybe on a commune level that works for things like, all right, who's on toilet duty? But like, that doesn't seem very applicable for anything larger than that.
It's not like the more complex things you're dealing with or the things that require more specialized knowledge, it gets worse as a decision-making method.
All right. What other kinds are there? There's like a million kinds of this thing. So many flavors.
Yeah, I think that these are more like descriptors. It's not like you see, oh, this country, they are a cellular democracy or something. But that's the next one we'll talk about. So cellular democracy just refers to a very ground up sort of grassroots level democratic process where you kind of have like neighborhood level councils and then you build up from there. So you would like, have your local neighborhood, like, government, I guess. And then that would build up to maybe your town government. And then that would build up to your state government. And you'd kind of elect delegates from those delegates at those local levels all the way up.
Okay. I mean, that sounds good. I mean, that I think along with the direct democracy, like I could see those pairing into a commune lifestyle pretty well.
Yeah. This one's a pretty good aspect. It's still kind of representative in a way. I mean, you are electing leaders.
Oh, do your neighborhood leaders then go to like the county to make decisions? Is that how that works?
Yeah, so they'll select from among themselves, who's cool, we're going up to the next level, that sort of thing. You can do it that way.
Is that how the Communist Party worked in the Soviet Union?
It's similar to that, yeah. It's that you're thinking within like the Communist Party itself and like the Supreme Soviet and everything. Yeah, you would elect kind of at the local level and build up from there. Yeah.
I think that's good because then you don't have to worry yourself with like questions that you don't really have a frame of reference for. Like we talked about, like, I don't know what they should do way the fuck over there because I don't live there. So you get to kind of not deal with that, but you can still deal with things that directly relate to you. That sounds good.
Yeah, yeah, it's not a bad idea. So I think again, it's like a component. It's not the whole system. It's just describing one aspect of it.
So what about majority rule versus consensus? I had kind of a hard time figuring. Is majority just like, well, it's 51 to 49, so like, fuck you, you lose?
Yeah. Majority rule is just simple
majority.
50 plus 1, yeah.
What's the consensus? Like everybody has to get on board?
So consensus, yeah, I think of this as a spectrum. So consensus is anywhere from like unanimous, right? We have to get, a literal consensus would be everyone agrees.
It'd take a long time.
Or very close to everyone agrees. But then, you can kind of sliding scale that, like, how much of a percentage do you need to say we reached a consensus, Like, is one cantankerous fellow, like, enough to, throw the whole thing out, or what? To me, the majority versus consensus question, each one has kind of its own pitfalls. Like majority can be kind of tyrannical because you're, like, bossing people around if they lost the vote, right? But consensus can be, like you said, kind of take a long time. It can lead to a lot of inaction because you're having to discuss and rework your proposals and all this till you get everyone on board.
Yeah, until you end up doing like really mealy-mouthed, like nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another is a discussion about like, okay, so should democracy be more aggregative or more deliberative?
Aggregative being like, oh, we're just trying to take like the average of what people think. Is that kind of it?
Well, it's kind of like it's essentially just boiling it down to voting and saying we are trying to figure out what people's preferences are and act on that. So you vote on a proposal, you vote on a candidate, and then whichever one wins, that's what we do. Deliberative focuses more on the discussion or deliberative side of things. It says that really democracy should be focused on making sure that an actual it's kind of talking about that consensus thing of like an actual interaction is had and people like speak about their ideas and get to express those and maybe reach a consensus or maybe have to vote if we can't reach a consensus. But it's basically talking about having more input rather than just checking a box.
Again, these are not individual types. These are traits. So if we pair this with, let's say, a direct democracy, deliberative would be like you go to the town council meeting first and you hear out everybody's sides to it and then you vote. Whereas aggregative is just like, hey, what the fuck you want to do?
Right. So aggregative doesn't really care what your opinions were to begin with. What they're going to do is give you a multiple choice thing, right? And then just you pick from that. And you don't really get to say, well, none of these really are great, right? There's no room for that.
Deliberative, like you could come up with a new idea, like, oh, what about option C? Like, I got it.
Yeah. And I think that's cool.
Me too.
It's like, it ends up being more authentic. And so your results, you can really start getting those crazy, the Western press and everything likes to be like, oh, this barbaric, communist country, they had 85% of people voting for this thing. Obviously, it's rigged. If you are actually putting in the work to get people's opinions about things beforehand, you might see a scenario where lots and lots of people want to go and vote and approve the thing that they spent like hours of their day hammering out.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of the next thing I want to talk about is like turnout. Like we have such a huge problem with turnout in this country and in a lot of places I'm sure they have similar issues. Let's just look it up. What's our turnout right now? U.S. voter turnout, Google machine. All right, 2020, you want to guess?
40%.
Actually, a lot higher, 62.
62? I guess we didn't have anything else to do.
We were all bored at home. 62% of us were like, yeah, I'll risk my life for this old ass motherfucker. I did it. I didn't like doing it, but I did it.
Wild.
Wow. 54 in 2016. That's quite the jump.
Do you have like a voter turnout by country?
Let's do that. Voter turnout by country. Would you like to guess the highest country for voter turnout?
It's got to be one of those mandatory countries. And who is mandatory? Cuba's not voluntary. They're voluntary. Vietnam is voluntary.
Cuba's not on this list. Maybe I should get a different list.
Somebody is compulsory, though. I don't know. Who?
According to this chart, it was Iceland.
Iceland. Okay.
Yeah. 81% of registered voters showed up.
Wow, nice.
That was in 2017. 2018, actually, Turkey wins with 88.97%.
Ah, okay. We're always way down on that list, though. We're not very good at it.
Oh, yeah. It takes quite a bit of scrolling to get to us. We are in the bottom, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty bad. All right. So that's the question. So obviously, voter turnout is a problem. How do we fix this? I know some countries do have mandatory voting. I'm, not super into making people do things as a little anarchist, but like, what do we do?
Well, if you're going to make people vote, you have to figure out this is, sometimes I think like a teacher about things. I'm like, okay, so if I make a rule, right, it requires me, it's more work on my part because I got to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do? What is the consequence when someone breaks this? So, all right, if you're building a society, what's going to be your consequence for not voting?
I don't feel comfortable putting any of those there because if I think about it from a socialist lens of like, it's the same as the what if you don't want to work question. It's like, I'll still take care of you. It's the same thing.
You could find them. You could say you have to be this rich not to vote, right? You could, punish them, put them in jail or something, or make them do community service. I don't know. I'm not in favor of mandatory voting, assuming a socialist project, right, or an anarchist project or whatever. If we were making the commune of the future, I don't think I would recommend mandatory voting.
Yeah, I think it's going to end up being more of that social pressure thing of like, weirdo didn't fucking vote. What the fuck? Doesn't he care about our community?
Yeah, definitely. And I would encourage that to be part of the culture. I wouldn't make it like a law that we get to punish people who don't do that. Because, not voting could be just general apathy or laziness or whatever, or inability to vote in some way, but it could also be like expressing like, I don't, this is fucking bullshit or whatever, like it can be kind of expressing a political opinion in a way.
Yeah. Cause when you look at the real reason behind people not voting, a lot of it is just logistical of like, hey, I can't take time off work, or I don't have transportation, or I don't have the right set of IDs, increasingly ridiculous ID amounts required. And then there is also huge disenfranchisement of just like, yeah, it's not going to fucking do anything. But if you were in like a really direct democracy at a really local level, you would probably see changes happening like much more closer to home.
Yeah, and it's kind of a combination of those two things too, if you think about it. Because like things can be inconvenient in our lives, but we still do them because there's like a reason to, and there's kind of a sliding scale. Maybe the more inconvenient it is, the more important it has to be for us to still do it. And so like the less and less important people think of voting as, because like, it's like, well, why fucking bother? They're just going to screw us over one way or the other. Then like, you're not going to be willing to, go jump through all those, increasing hoops to go do it. And so in the commune, we could look at this and say, okay, well, this voter turnout was this. Well, let's look at the percentage of people that didn't vote. What were the reasons? We could conduct surveys. We could try to figure out, it's cool. Like, you can tell us, we're not going to, punish you. But like, did you just think that we suck? Like, was it too hard? Can we make it easier for you? These sorts of things.
Yeah. It absolutely should be like as accessible as possible in like every conceivable way. Like if you have a disability and you can't travel, like if you, I don't know, there's like a million different things that could be done. Like it should just be like, it should be so fucking easy.
Yeah.
What about, I've heard about this from other countries. I think Australia has it. Ranked choice voting. I've heard this as a way to, this was going around the internet, I feel like a lot after Donald Trump got elected, as like, hey, here's how you prevent like really bad people from getting into office. Is that true? And is it useful?
It's still like a representative democracy thing. Okay, so
let's pretend we're okay with that.
It's still within a capitalist system, it's not going to do crazy amounts of good, but whatever. So what it would be is like and some listeners like, yeah, man, that's like what we do here. I get it. But Americans, this is mostly foreign to us. There are a couple states that do this now. But what you do is you like rank your candidates. Okay, so you got candidates 1, 2, 3, and 4, or A, B, C, and D, or whatever, and you rate them like first place, second place, third place, fourth place, whatever, however many. And then they tally up all the first place results, first place votes, right? And whoever, if no one gets a majority, then they cross out the last place person. They take all their votes and recount them, but like redistribute them to their second place vote.
Oh.
All right. So then the percentages go up, and then you say, okay, do we have a majority? Yes or no? And then if not, you repeat the process. There's different ways to do it. There's like a bunch of formulas and stuff. So, but that's like the most common way to do it, I think. Okay.
This sounds very mathy. I don't like that.
It is. But like, if you think about how so much the election totals and everything, they're digitally tallied and stuff now.
That's true.
It's mostly able to be done. I think. Again, it's a technical, probably a technical improvement in some way. It's going to allow you to vote for somebody, even though you think that they probably won't win, because you still get to have kind of a say. If your, darling leftist candidate doesn't win, you can still vote. You can put your second or third place person as, the hold your nose and vote for them.
Yeah.
Joe Biden-ass option.
Okay. Yeah. That's how it was definitely phrased in those kinds of posts of like, this still allows you to dictate a preference and to, it prevents the lesser of two evils situation.
I don't know. I'm not super. I like it, I guess. It's like fine, but there's an element of it that's still trying to make excuses for why we should in some way support like the Democratic Party, right? Like,
yeah, milquetoast motherfuckers.
Yeah, and say, well, you can go out there and like vote for your loser or whatever if you want to, but like you still need to, lend us tacit support. Like, I don't know. And it's still kind of like blaming the left for the miserable performance of, like you said, milquetoast liberals, It's like saying, well, if only the Bernie bros would come out here and vote.
It's always our fault, but there's also not enough of us to elect a president. It's super weird.
We're simultaneously insignificant and horrifying.
Schrodinger's leftists.
But yeah, that's the thing that rubs me the wrong way about it. I'd be of half a mind just to write my first place and just turn in the ballot and say, fuck you,
Just write it in all the spaces. Just like, fuck you. Yeah. I do think that's a good point. And even if you like try to like flip it the other way of like, oh, well, this prevents you from voting for a super evil person and like from them winning. And I'm like, it could still totally win. And also like, I don't want that turned against me.
Yeah, that's true.
So that one's out for me.
No. Yeah. I think it's fine within a capitalist, democracy or whatever. Like it's okay. It's a reform, but I don't think too much about reforms. So
yeah, that's the thing.
And I don't think it will substantially help the material conditions of people either. It's going to make things more confusing. If you do want to do electoral reforms to help regular people today, one big one is just making it easier to vote. You're still talking about reforms within the systems. But if you're constricting yourself to that, I think just accessibility to voting is a better avenue than the math solution.
For our reformist friends, that's definitely like, we're on board with that. Like if y'all are all about, make voting a national holiday and like make it so like it's just the easiest fucking thing in the world to do. Absolutely. Sure. That is a great stopgap measure for the time being.
Yeah, I also agree with that.
So, I don't know. We've been talking a lot about like going back and forth between present day democracy and what we want it to be in future commune land. And one thing that I like kind of was laughing reading about like just the regular Wikipedia page for democracy is how steeped it is in like just very snooty culture, I guess,
okay.
of... So, one, this is more of an aside. I thought it was very funny that they listed some cornerstones of democracy, and I want you to say which one of these stands out.
Okay.
Cornerstones of democracy include freedom of assembly, association, property rights, freedom of religion and speech, inclusiveness and equality, citizenship, consent of the governed, voting rights, freedom from unwarranted governmental deprivation of the right to life, liberty, and minority rights. Which one of those is like a little weird to you?
I don't know what property rights had to do with it.
Yeah, what the fuck did that have to do with it? I was like, am I missing something?
But that's, I mean, that's what we mean when we say like capitalist democracies, liberal democracies, bourgeois democracies, is they just go ahead and write that into it, right? They just go ahead and say, slip it in there with all the other good things. That was one of the things from the reading too, right? Malatesta said, they have to have all these like, rights of man bullshit so that they can slip in these things that otherwise you would be like, hey, hold up, what? You have the right to keep the pile of money from your dead ancestors? Like what?
So my other, I guess, main point, that was just a fun little sidetrack, is that in reading about democracy, like if you look at the history of it, maybe not like all the way back to, ancient Greece or whatever, but let's just think like Enlightenment age. It really was the transition to power from like monarchy kind of rule to democracy, but it's like they were too scared to go straight to the people. Like that's very obvious in the way that like the United States and a lot of other places as well, and the way their government is set up. Like that was a huge concern of like, well, we can't just like let the people do it.
Yeah, and the entirety of the democratic project, if you're talking English Civil War, the parliamentarians, outside of like the radical, true levelers and the diggers and stuff, outside of those guys, your mainstream parliamentarians were advocating for a property holders republic. Okay, so like you had to be rich enough to vote. That's the democracy they wanted. And it's the same thing in the United States. Most of the states had property requirements for voting up until the 1830s, 1840s.
Yeah, so like I think that's important to point out. And you can say, well, like, oh, well, that's changed now. But like, listen to all of the barriers to voting we just talked about. Like the same rule still applies. Like if you're not rich enough to have a salary job, or you can like take the day off to go vote, or even to take some time off to go vote, sorry, you ain't voting.
Or, it's not just that. It's if you're working 3-4 jobs and you are trying to care for your kids and all this, you don't.
Oh yeah, childcare, that's huge.
Even if you had some time free in the day, I mean, we're asking you, to spend your like 1-2 hours to yourself and just toss that away for what?
Standing in a line in like potentially hot weather. If you have a chronic illness where you can't stand for long periods of time, like there's a million barriers.
Right. And there's early voting and everything, of course. But again, we're asking you with very, some people with very limited time to do that or ability to do that, then saying, well, do all that. For what?
So I guess I just wanted to bring that up because like I think obviously the history we're taught is much more like lionizing of these ideals of like, wow, they really just wanted to give people the rights to do shit. And it's like they wanted to give like a few people rights. They're very, very scared of other people getting those rights. Yeah,
initially. And that's not to say that everyone was, on the wrong side of that. Like they were, like we said, even back in the English Civil War times, there were the diggers who were trying to expand that to everyone, and the true levelers and stuff who were saying, no, everyone should have, or I guess universal manhood suffrage anyway. And then eventually there was, the push for that. There was the push for women's suffrage. Like there are people throughout history trying to expand that democratic circle. At every step of the way too, there's also the other side that's saying, no, do you want to turn this over to the rabble,
All right, so now that we've kind of got a handle on like some of the different kinds of democracy and, the American tradition of how we view democracy, what about the cool guys? What do they think about it? What do the anarchists think? What do the communists think? Like how do we want to organize ourselves in this way?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So they're vastly different approaches in a way. I mean, I think that they would all end up in the same place, but the classic difference between the anarchists and maybe the Marxists in general is, how do you get there?
Let's do it right now is what the anarchists say.
So the anarchist conception, I think, of democracy is definitely, it's not, I wouldn't say it's representative so much as it's more direct, but the key thing I think for them is consensus. Because without consensus, if you end up resorting to majoritarian ways to do things, then you're going to be forcing some people to do something that they disagree with.
I'm once again thinking of the dispossessed, where like they kind of realize they've accidentally gotten into like a majority rule, where they're like, man, if I disagree with something, like I'm basically shunned, like I'm not kicked out, but like everyone treats me like shit. Like I basically can't do certain things here. And isn't that like, in direct opposition to our project?
Sort of, yeah. But you also mentioned it though earlier, is like, well, you would just get shunned, or if you did something against it. So I don't know. There is that social pressure aspect that is there and is going to be there in any human society. You can't just get rid of that and say, hey, no, you got to treat, the fascists nicely.
Because then you're trying to control how people react to things, and that's also not fair.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, this sounds chaotic and everything. And it is, but you have to also, I think, step back and say, what is important that we are all on the same page on? And where does it not matter? Right? So one of the big things I think with the anarchists is that kind of, if they don't get consensus on something, then the idea is we're not going to force people to do it. Maybe we end up, instead of all figuring out one way to solve this problem, maybe those of us who want to do it this way, and those of us who want to do it a different way, do it a different way. Like maybe we can actually have more than one policy at the same time, basically.
Let's give an example. I think this maybe is an example from our board game that we played, the Quiet Year, of, somebody wants to build a church, and like maybe that's not everybody's jam, but we can say like, hey, if you don't want to go to it, you don't have to fucking go to it. Just like, that's fine.
Yeah.
And
so like the people who want to build a church, they can be in charge of like gathering the resources for that, devoting the time for that. Anyone who wants to participate in that can participate in that. It's very much, I like that you bring up the dispossessed. It's very much like that of like, hey, we form like, the university or whatever, like people who are interested in these things, like they get together and they do these research projects and stuff. And it's very much like, I guess, community driven.
I think you then have to be really clear about what your main goals are or what your main project is, so that you don't end up with any like shitty stuff. And what I mean by shitty stuff is like discriminatory stuff, or like just, I don't know, like you can't let it go too far, I guess. I don't know. Like the church example, I feel like is fairly harmless. Unless that church is like, well, we're going to like eat people. Like you can't let that happen.
Yeah, but how do you stop that?
I don't know.
You just have to have the people go stop it, right?
Okay. Everyone has a baseball bat.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, that's essentially what the anarchists argue, is that the people won't allow people to take their rights away, just as they're not taking other people's rights away. So once you decide, hey, I'm going to go fuck up this guy's rights, then that guy and his fellow anarchists are going to stop you from that.
So I think that is an important kernel. I think we mentioned this with the anarchy reading as well, is like you can have rights as long as they don't infringe on other people's rights.
Yeah, for sure. The same freedom to go, freedom to believe whatever you want is fine.
Yeah, you can be an asshole if you really want to.
But like putting those beliefs into practice in a way that targets other people, that's where the rest of the commune is going to say, you're not going to be able to do that. When you try to do that, we're going to fix you. All
right, what about those Marxist-Leninists, those MLMs? What do all those guys think about democracy? I know Lenin wrote a lot about it.
So I don't know. I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap sometime. Because I would argue that Marxists want more democracy than, capitalists or liberals do.
I would agree on that. I think there is a pop culture or a
common sense.
Yeah, there's a shared idea of communist countries being not democratic and tyrannical or dictatorship, like we talked about last week with like the red fascism kind of scare. Whereas we may have democracy in name of like, yeah, I went to go vote, but like we all also understand that it's a lot of bullshit.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, how do you want it? You know?
You'll hear a lot of times, oh, well, but like Marx, he's for a dictatorship, man, and
oh my God.
That's what
they didn't read the next two words.
Well, even so, I honestly, I think it's a little bit of bad branding, right? Like, why do we got to keep using, maybe we shouldn't keep using dictatorship of the proletariat, right? It's like, kind of makes it sound like we want a dictatorship.
Yeah, mandate of the people is much friendlier.
That's kind of good. Because, for a little one-on-one, if you skipped all the episodes.
Welcome.
A little one-on-one there. When communists talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat, all it's saying is that the power of the state or the commune or whatever you have is in the hands of the working class, the proletariat, the people. The reason Marx used dictatorship of the proletariat was to contrast that with what he says we have now. Even though we have democracy in name, we actually have a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie or the capitalists, the bosses. And he's saying, I want to flip that. I want to change that. Right now the state just works for the interests of the capitalists. They're in charge. They tell everyone else what to do. That's why he says it's a dictatorship. He wants to flip that and say, now I want the people to be in charge. So now this dictatorship is good because it's the people who are doing it, right? That was an old, clever turn of phrase that we may want to modernize.
It's been taken out of context. Yeah. Okay. So when we say dictatorship of the proletariat, then it's the people in charge. How do they decide what they're going to do?
Well, first of all, to kind of correct my initial thinking of this, and I was kind of typing out like, okay, well, what sort of characteristics do we see? I guess the first thing to address is that like it looks different in different situations. And in the future, in, our glorious communist future, it will look different depending on the material conditions. To be good Marxists about it, we got to say that, right?
Yeah. Disclaimer.
Yeah. Now, to be lousy utopians about it, let's figure out what it would look like. So generally, in historical examples anyway, we've seen that socialist states tend to be more majoritarian versus consensus, right? So you're going to go with the majority vote. It's not to say that they don't try to, because we're going to see some examples of them trying to reach more of a consensus, right? Putting in the work to get people on board with what they're doing, all right? But at the end of the day, you are going to have a vote. The majority is going to do it, and you're going to enact a policy. I think one big difference in that we've been kind of talking about along the edges maybe is that communist democracy is not just political democracy. It's not just here's a way to vote for your leaders. It's not just representative democracy in that way, or even just like direct democracy, like let's figure out these policies. But like we're talking all the way down to like economic democracy of being in control of your workplace. That's another big component of it.
When you say economic, so you mean your workplace directly, like where my, factory that I work at, my office that I work at, whatever. How then do those interact with each other?
Taking a Marxist-Leninist approach or a Maoist approach, like we're talking a worker state sort of thing, we would be looking at some form of central planning. And that could look a number of different ways depending on your conditions, right? So back in the day, they had to just kind of submit reports and calculate it all out at Gosplan and then churn out quotas and try to meet that. Pretty haphazard. Remember in Chile,
the Star Trek computer?
Yeah, they were modernizing it with the computer feedback and everything. Think about the capabilities. All right. You want a centrally planned economy? Think about Walmart. Think about Amazon. These guys managed to do it. We could do that.
Yeah, I can get a computer charger in an hour without leaving my house. Like if I can do something so frivolous as that.
Yeah.
Or even like, the AI memes that are going around, like the image generator.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen those?
Yeah.
What if like we put all that like computing processing power to like something useful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not to say we can't do frivolities, of course, but like,
oh, for sure.
But yeah, I agree. Like we are in such a stage of technological advancement that some of these things of like, oh, planned economies are too clunky. Like, dude, you're essentially living in a planned economy. It's just got like 30 different bosses. And we're just saying, what if we have all those guys working together on the same team and we're not exploiting people, like that, making some changes, but like still utilizing that planning, that logistics capability. So at your workplace, right, your regular workers, their job would be obviously to carry out the work and stuff, but to feed back up the system, what's working, what's not, what struggles do we have? I remember you were over here and you were looking through A Day in the Life of the Soviet Union book that I have. It was from the late 80s, but
I love that book.
But describe the picture that you were.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is an amazing coffee table book. And I was actually just about to bring that up when you did. It was this photograph of like this crowd of people surrounding, and I think they were mostly women, surrounding these two guys who like had clipboards, and it looked like they were just like telling them off. And the caption was like, "This is a workers' meeting." Like everyone was just telling the managers what they thought about how the workplace was run.
Yeah, it was kind of like a open mic complaint thing, so like a town hall situation. And economic democracy definitely means that. You want a say in how your workplace is run, and I get it. Nobody wants to go to another meeting, right? Because another meeting just means right now that you're being told something that could have been in an email. Your boss is just kind of giving you more things to think about, putting more on your plate. But when you're talking about a meeting in a worker state, we're talking about a meeting in even like a anarcho-syndicalist, situation or whatever, where you're running your workplace, like you're making your own future days at work better, easier for yourself and your fellow workers.
Do we have any examples of like how other leftist projects have like dealt with democracy or not dealt?
We have a couple of examples of Marxist-Leninist states and kind of what they did, or what they continue to do, we should say. Both of them are still around. So one is Cuba. And I had a source for this. I put it in my notes here, a link to a video that was from 2018. So I kind of had to do some research to get like the modern version, because they updated some of the laws and stuff there since then. But it was by Azure Scapegoat. To break down Cuba's kind of system, their constitution was most recently rewritten in 2019. So very recently.
Wow. Ours is like fucking still like taped together from a different century. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's very terrible. And their constitutional rewriting process was very democratic. They held 135,000 meetings across the country.
Holy shit.
To consider like amendments, to propose amendments and stuff to this new constitution. Like they kind of did a draft, and then they were like, hey, here's what we're thinking. And people were like, well, what about this? What about this? And they would come up with all these. And then they had a big referendum. So after all these meetings across the country, and then after bringing up the amendments and saying, okay, yeah, this is a good idea, we'll put that in, whatever. Then they end up with this, huge document, but it's one that they've put in all this time. The people have had a say in it, right? So they have a big referendum. And they end up with like 90% of people voting yes. They have an 84% voter turnout.
Holy crap.
Yeah. And they've done that before. Back in 1976, the Constitution before that, they did a similar thing. They had big meetings. They generated like 16,000 amendments at their meetings. And they, because everyone was like, yeah, they took into account all of what we wanted to put in there, then they have so many people showing up, and voting for it. So that's one example of that whole, we were saying about deliberative, right, of getting to talk that out and getting to have input in the process. Makes it more worthwhile than them just showing up, hey, do you like our ideas? This is your idea too.
Yeah, you have more, ownership.
They also have elements of direct democracy in Cuba. So this is through the CDRs, the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, which I think they sound more aggressive than they are.
Really
but
do.
They were formed in the context of like counter-revolutionary violence breaking out. Someone set off a bomb in Havana somewhere, and Castro was like, hey, we gotta set up these we got to defend the revolution against, the enemies and whatnot. But the way this works, you have to be 14 years or older to join. And then you meet at least quarterly or more often to basically like run aspects of your communities. Things like public health or hygiene, waste and recycling, like putting together volunteer work brigades for things, doing mutual aid for people who are struggling in the neighborhood, doing propaganda work as well, putting out educational stuff and things for people, as well as kind of its older thing that it carries over still is like security versus counter-revolutionary things. Like, is somebody trying to work with the CIA or whatever?
That's so cool, though. I love that. I love that idea. So I'm assuming this is like, is this like voluntary, like on the side of whatever it is you normally do for work, or how? Okay,
yeah, this is just almost like a club. I mean, it's not a paid position. And I like that. Another thing they do is kind of send up proposals. So like we were saying through the economic democracy, where you send up things up the line and say, hey, what about this? Like the CDRs also do this. They send up proposals to the Communist Party. They're separate from it, but they, work together still. And so it's like on the ground feedback. It's like, hey, our neighborhood over here, we're struggling with this, and this is structured in that same kind of cellular way, like we were saying before, where it's like very neighborhood level, like your street, your block, and then it builds up from there.
That's very cool. What is the difference then between that and like the Communist Party? Is it just a structural thing, or I don't know?
The Communist Party in Cuba is more of like the political activists. It's only around 700,000 members out of a population of 11 million. And so these are the guys that are like dedicated, political cadres, political activists. They are trying to advance the Communist Party agenda. A lot of them are like professional. Some of them are professional party members or whatever. A lot of them are just like prominent members in the community and stuff. But the CDRs are more like local groups. It's like less prestigious. I wouldn't say it takes less effort, but it's like less of a
scope.
They're not like the government. They're more like just people helping people, almost a mutual aid sort of thing. Plus the security side of it. I don't want to gloss it, and he's not talking about their surveillance or whatever. They do that too. So next, though, about Cuba is their elections. Kind of keep it simple here. They have municipal level elections, your local like city or that sort of thing, and then national assembly elections. That's every 5 years they have elections. They used to have state elections or province elections, but they got rid of that.
Makes sense. It's pretty small.
So every 5 years they have elections. They always have super high turnout. In 2018, they had pretty low turnout at 85%.
Wow.
Yeah. But voting is not even required. It's voluntary.
Wow. And it's still 85%.
Still 85%.
Pretty impressive.
Well, you're automatically registered to vote.
That's huge.
Immediately. No filling out paperwork or nothing, right? There's no party requirement to be able to vote or to be elected. The Communist Party of Cuba actually doesn't directly participate in the election. It's an overwhelmingly like communist country, so it's not to say that most people aren't communists when they're elected or anything. They are, but it's just they're not like they're putting money into it, running ads or anything like that. I liked this. Interested to hear your thoughts on it. To be able to vote, age requirement 16. 16 to be able to vote and to be elected to your local government. Yeah.
This is our teen mayor. Oh, man. Here's the thing. I was really fucking stupid at 16.
Sure, but aren't plenty of people really...
Plenty of people continue to be stupid, yeah.
This is, it doesn't detract from, your informedness on the issues. While I would hope that it could be improved and that you would want to improve it, I think you're right to have a say in the government that sets the laws for your people. Doesn't go away because you're less informed.
I think it's an overall good if it's within this system of like hyper local involvement and stuff like that, because you're getting them at an early enough age that they can like see these immediate effects and like maybe want even to stay in their community because they're like, yeah, I want to keep helping this place.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's interesting.
And then to be elected to the National Assembly, you have to be 18.
Okay, that's fine. Still a teen, but whatever.
So I'm for these reforms.
Just don't care.
I think 16 to vote, that's great. Yeah, I'm for it. They have a very high representation percentage, I don't know what that's called, of women in the National Assembly. So in their current National Assembly, 53.2% of them are women.
Holy crap. We have 3 women senators right now?
We have more than that.
It's not very many.
321 out of 605. That's for Cuba. For the U.S., we're looking at, in Congress, that's House of Representatives and Senate, 27%. So that's 145 out of 535.
Okay, not great.
Another thing that I would point out is those numbers there are pretty ridiculous. Not just the percentage of women, but did you get the total number there?
Yeah, sorry, our total's 400 something?
535 if you
500.
count the Senate and the House.
And then Cuba's population is how much smaller than ours, and they have more people.
They have more representatives for 11 million people than we do for 331 million.
That is a great point. Wow.
So if you boil it down to how much attention can my legislator pay to, not just to me, but to my neighborhood, to my immediate needs, it's a lot smaller for Americans than for Cubans. Some other characteristics that they have an age limit for, an upper age limit for the president of Cuba. It's a little bit convenient, kind of, because they said, it has to be a max of 60 years old to start your first term. So if you're already in your first term, which this guy was, then it doesn't apply to him. So a little convenient for him, but it's good for the future, I guess.
That seems kind of young. I don't know. I feel like I know a lot of 60-year-olds that have it together.
Yeah, maybe 70, probably for sure. I would put a 70.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Apologies to any septuagenarians listening.
No, yeah, that is a little ageist, and I would be interested to see what are alternatives to doing that. But
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, this gets, I think, to one of my essential questions about government. Like I mentioned it earlier, of the idea of only the smartest or best people should be in charge. There's so many different ways to define that. So if we're looking at the problem of, let's say, ageism, of even on the younger end of things, what age should, teens be allowed to vote? I mean, not everyone's the same at every age.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And you don't want to do things like fucking IQ tests or something, because those can be super ableist and shitty. Mm-hmm. So there's not a great way to determine that in a black and white rule.
It may just be better not to have such limits and just to make sure people are informed about who they're choosing, or
have an exit ramp of hey, this guy's off his rocker, right? We can all agree.
You could recall people. That's true. You could set it up that way. Or you can just say the anarchists, let's not do so much representative stuff. Let's be more direct. And that way you don't have to worry about someone who's
if crazy
incapable.
grandpa wants to vote a certain way, we can just ignore him. It's fine.
Yeah. So if you're elected as one of these delegates to your local government or even the national government, you don't get any pay, which I don't know is kind of rough. I would be more for Lenin's solution of a prevailing worker's wage or whatever.
Yeah, same here.
I don't want you to be rolling around with your, fancy, like we do in the U.S., where you get paid a bunch and you get all the lobbyist money and all that.
My immediate question upon hearing that is well, how do they live? Either have to be rich enough to say, well, I don't need a job, so let me go into government, or I guess they're somehow getting some money from some. I don't understand how they.
You also, I mean, it's
survive.
Not 100%. You're not doing things 100% of the time. Kind of like the Texas legislature, or whatever. You're not always in session.
Okay, gotcha. I think they should be always in session doing shit and also be getting paid.
I think I would be in favor of that more. If we're doing representative. If we're doing anarchists, obviously you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Well, so how do they vote, right? So they have municipal elections. And what you do is you choose the candidates in neighborhood assemblies. And this has, again, huge turnout. Everybody shows up, basically, and they pick who's going to be the candidates for their neighborhood. And so then they post this, and they have the elections by wards, which is anywhere from 2 to 8 neighborhood kind of conglomerated together, each one with a candidate, all right, that they've decided on in these meetings. So when you do that, they basically just they post those people, like their faces and their like little bio and what they are, the reasons that they're running. They post those up. That's the election season. That's the election campaign. There's no spending money. There's no, election promises or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. See, I love that. Are these pictures and bios available? Like when you vote, you can just read them?
I don't know if they probably do have them in the voting booth too. I didn't see a picture of that or anything, but they do have them like posted publicly outside. They have them online. They probably have them in the voting booth too. I don't know.
Because that's, okay, I have a Swiss cheese brain, and that's my problem with voting. I mean, I have a lot of problems with voting right now. But the last time I went to go vote, like, I really wanted to look up, like, names and shit. And, like, I couldn't because, like, a cop yelled at me to put my phone away. But a white guy next to me definitely was looking at his phone while he was voting, so.
Yeah, well, that's, they serve certain interests, so.
Mm-hmm. Just want to point that out. I need a list with me. I know I could have written down the list beforehand. Don't fucking at me.
If it helps, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter at all.
So anyway, the national elections are kind of run the same way or similar way. Half of the National Assembly are nominated from those municipal elections, basically. So they have more big meetings and they say, okay, who's going to be our candidates from the municipal delegates? Who are we going to send to national delegates? The other half come from mass organizations. These are things like the CDRs we were talking about, Women's Federation, labor unions, the universities, and the Small Farmers Association.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so they get to pick, and they put those guys on the ballot too. All right, so when they come up with these lists and everything in these mass meetings, and then they have the election's on Sunday. They have secret ballots. They have this kind of nerdy thing where they have like school children guarding, quote unquote, guarding the ballot boxes there.
That's cute.
Yeah, it's just, to give them part of like a little civics sort of thing. And also like their parents keep coming in to like, hey, you okay? You need anything? So it's like, the community is kind of taking part in this. It's very communal.
Yeah. And what are you going to do? Voter fraud in front of a child? You got to feel a little bit bad about that.
Yeah, that's low. So yeah, they do that. They count the votes publicly. Now, when you're going in to vote, you said you had a Swiss cheese brain. All you have to remember is, am I voting for this person or not? So when you go in, you can vote for the full list. You can say, all these motherfuckers are good. All right.
I love these guys.
Or you can say, I like this guy and I like this guy. I don't like this
Fuck this
person
guy.
though. So you can selectively vote, or you can turn in a blank one. You can say no. All these.
Fuck all these hoes.
They're all bad. That's how it's run, because the idea is we spent the time in the mass meetings figuring out that these are good guys, or that that we think these people are pretty good. We had a consensus going there basically, so we shouldn't have a problem. Now, if they get less than 50% at the election, then they don't get picked. Then they have to go back and pick someone else. That's similar to how the Soviets did it.
I like that, because it's a lot easier to just be like, no, not that one.
Another thing, once you get elected, you're not in the clear. You have to meet with your constituents. You're legally obligated to do so at least twice a year. A lot of times they do more. You have to go to like what they call accountability sessions, which is like a town hall. And, you answer questions and say, well, why haven't you fixed this fucking thing or whatever? And like you said, you can be recalled whenever.
That's huge.
I don't think they do it, but you can be.
No, just the accountability stuff alone. Like, how many times, like, people are like, oh, call your representative. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to get through. Like, I'm just going to fucking leave a voice message or, like, email, and, like, nothing will happen. Now I'm on fucking Louis Gohmert's email list. That's all that happens, is he got my address.
Yeah, for sure. It's very ineffectual here unless you are, like, for some reason in a competitive district or a group that they care about. If you're not, you're chopped liver.
Mm-hmm. If you personally know him, maybe, but that's about it.
Yeah. All right, so that's Cuba. That's kind of how they do things. That's a good example.
I'm into it. Overall, very good. Would do over this system in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think it's, get complaints. Oh, well, they only have one person on the ballot. But I think that with all that, with all the democracy going on from below, I think.
Yes.
It's so much more democratic as an overall system than our kind of illusion of choice thing where they don't ask for your input at all and they just give you a bunch of shitty options and say, hey, narrow this down to 2 guys. Okay, now who are you going to pick, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's the difference between top down and bottom up.
It's like a multiple choice question versus an essay question.
Yes.
All right. Next example I had was Vietnam.
What are they doing?
So Vietnam, one party state, Communist Party of Vietnam. Good source for this, and she has the notes and everything in her description of the video there. But this is from Luna Oi's YouTube channel. She had a video on this. I linked it in the notes. But so they're pretty interesting. They do a similar thing to Cuba in terms of like having street level elected leaders.
Hyperlocal.
Yeah, this is the leader or kind of the elected guy on my neighborhood, on my street. They also don't need to be a party member to be elected or anything. Most of them are. Most of them end up being party members, but there are some in the National Assembly who are independent. And you can go and you can campaign as like, oh, I'm like pro-business. There are a lot of like business interests and basically capitalist sort of firms or whatever in Vietnam. People do, campaign on that. She was saying in the video, like, they usually lose because most of us are communists,
Yeah,
We're in a communist country. We like support that. We fought a big, huge war to make this possible.
Yeah.
They do a similar thing campaign-wise. They post the info publicly and online. It's really plain. It's just, here's this person, here's what they're about. They also do kind of an interview, like a town hall Q&A meeting with the candidates. There's no like campaigning except for just like going and talking to voters. You can't buy banners. You can't do any of that at all. You can only like go talk to people and say, hey, I'm running for, like, please vote for me. You can do that. But that's it. So they're like one party thing or whatever. You have the Communist Party, but you also have something called the Fatherland Front, which sounds, Fatherland sounds weird, but it's actually made up of the Communist Party plus all these other like groups. You're saying interest groups for similar to that because you have like women's federations, you have like labor unions. If you're whatever like group you are a part of in the context of your life, if you are in whatever labor union or whatever, you're in a community group, or those organizations are almost all of them are in that Fatherland Front. So it's all like it's basically like the people overall.
Everybody. Yeah.
And they kind of have the ability to, and they've done so in the past, is kind of like control or check things that the Communist Party wants to do. If the Communist Party is trying to go in a direction that it gets separated from the people in a way, they can kind of rein it in and be like, we should do this instead. Elections themselves, they are also Sunday elections. This one is they actually don't do like any mail ballots or anything like that. But what they did, like in COVID, for example, they just brought the ballot boxes to people.
Oh my God, can you imagine? That'd be rad. I'm like tying up my bathrobe, like, yeah, give me a pen. What's up?
They also have huge turnout, like they're also voluntary voters. But it's a similar thing to the Cuban situation where it's like they don't have as democratic of like a small in terms of like the nominating process is more party run or whatever. Not party run, I should say, because it is through that Fatherland Front. So it's like everybody, I guess. But it's not originating with your street level leaders per se.
It's more national.
Yeah. For the National Assembly elections, I mean, you do vote on those street level guys and everything. So you still have that element. I don't want to discount it. It sounds really cool. To me, again, it's strange for us. You still end up with that like approval or disapproval sort of thing. But you do end up with like multiple candidates for things. So they kind of have, I guess, a lower success rate maybe than Cuba does in terms of everyone always gets elected.
Yeah, because they didn't have those like many meetings to like confirm like, hey, this is who we're nominating. They just start nominating people.
Right. So if someone like gets approved, just gets not, it's not they get like they file for the candidacy and you can nominate yourself.
So there's no vetting process on that end.
Well, there's slight a vetting process, like if you are funded by the CIA or something, or and they will do that. They will disqualify candidates and whatever,
Wow.
because they're like, they have reactionary ties and stuff. And so they're like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. That's fucking
But
fine.
as long as you're not doing that, you can like be a dumbass, and they'll be like, well, that's fine, I guess. And
Sure, I
then
guess.
you go out there and you lose.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a little less, I guess they're putting a little less of that consensus work in at the beginning, but they still have like a method of weeding out people that suck, you know?
Let's kind of get to what I feel like I've been dancing around, not just for this episode, but for several episodes now, which are the pitfalls of democracy.
Okay.
How do you make sure that a democracy actually reflects people's choices? We've talked a little bit about like, you know, how maybe representative doesn't always do that. We talked about like the rigged choice ideas. We talked about how like some other countries do it. What are we thinking in general though? What's a good rule? What's a good guiding principle?
For me, I think it's about having that input. So kind of being deliberative with it, right? Of having like Cuba does with being able to go and hash it out in a meeting and say like, this guy's good, this guy's not so good, you know, really getting a chance to participate in that process outside of, I mean, again, like we do primaries, but that's another multiple choice situation. That's another one that's heavily influenced by just who's got the most money, who's got the spare time to pay attention to it. And I don't know, I think that sort of participatory angle is a big deal in terms of coming up with the candidates that you're talking about. And that's just to talk about representative. Obviously, if you're moving to a more direct approach, then the democratic outcome that should just de facto represent the people's actual choice, right?
Inherently, that's what that's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we get into the next question, which I think that answer also feeds into, what about bad ideas?
Okay.
What if the majority of your people are jerks and they believe bad things, and you have to deal with that? You know, like how do you protect minorities? How do you guard against that? I'm going to answer my own question real quick.
All right, do it.
I think it does come back to that consensus building, and I think a huge component of that is like education, and however your media is run is going to be a huge part of that. You can call it propaganda if you want to, but like all of those things together, like you need an informed public.
Yeah, and propaganda is only really bad if you disagree with it.
Everything's propaganda, guys. It's fine.
Yeah, it's it can be good. It can
Yeah.
teach you to be a good person, to do good things.
I'm a comic artist. I make propaganda.
Yeah. Well, what do you do? So that's an element of it, but you're still going to be, you know, pulling yourself out of the lake of capitalism. So you're still going to have a bunch of wet folks. The anarchist approach to that says, well, they're going to, you know, like we said, they may have some bad ideas, but as long as they don't try to do those things to other people, then it's fine. And like, you don't need to worry about everyone being racist or, you know, whatever. Like if you're in a bad part of the country where everyone has retrograde views on something, or lots of people do, if somehow you have achieved anarchism there anyway, then they can't do anything to you, because then you're actual good anarchists who are like, hey, anarchy is not about, you know, you can't like take people's freedoms away like that by being discriminatory toward them. They would step in. Now, I mean, it depends on doing anarchy well, I guess, because if you're not, right, like...
Yeah, I think where it gets concerning, I think where a lot of people have their concerns is kind of the scenario you're talking about. Like, all right, if I live in a place, like in a conservative area that just happens to have more people who like are not down with, queer people or black people or whatever it is. I mean, you're right. I think it does depend on an anarchy that is accurate in that it teaches people that like, hey, that's not okay to do. But if somehow they've gotten the message of anarchy without the message of like solidarity between everybody, then like, what do you do, I guess?
Well, the converse of that, and it's not as good of a solution. The good solution is enough of us are good anarchists, so when someone's an asshole anarchist who doesn't get it, we can make them get it or make them get out. When the numbers are flipped, the second best solution is that because you are in an anarchist society, well, kind of one, right? You're kind of in one. Hopefully the material part of that is achieved too. So you don't face as many barriers as you do in our society now. So you actually are able to just leave when you don't like it. It's kind of like a crappy phrase that we associate with.
Like, oh, just move.
Right. You can love it or leave it sort of thing, right? But like in a narco-communist society, even if they're doing this part shitty, if they're doing the rest okay, then you should have the resources or whatever. You should be able to actually leave and go find a place that's doing it right.
Right. What is concerning, I think, to a lot of people on the left who are like, I don't know, just like more involved in marginalized communities. And I think the left has gotten better about this over the past few years. Like, I think there's a certain level of awareness now. But for a long time, like the left has been like a pretty, at least the American left, has been almost, I don't know if hyper-focused is the right way to put it, but you'll meet a lot of like online leftists who are just like, well, we only can focus on economics, like that's the only thing, and like a certain disregard for social factors. So I think that is definitely where the concern comes from of like, okay, even if we get everyone on board to the socialism thing, how do I make sure that like I'm still like safe, There's
no good 100% guarantee of it. I mean, it comes down to the nature of what a government is. I mean, we want to hide behind laws that protect our rights, but we're just that is just a big bad guy with a gun that's going to come and enforce the law.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we talked about this the other day of just like, yeah, you can shit on like the Supreme Court a lot, and like we certainly do on this program. But there was also like the Warren Court that was like telling people like, hey, you can't like do that racist thing anymore. you know?
Yeah.
So like I see the benefit sometimes of having someone to say like, hey, fucking cut it out. In this case, we just have to realize that power is now somewhere else. It is now with like your community, which can be scary. That involves a lot of trust.
It does, and this is probably a good example of why, Marx says don't try to get every utopian wrinkle out, because by the time that we've built up enough class consciousness, so like we're not actually going to do the wizard waves the wand and we wake up and we're in, right. So we have a long road to get there. And what are we doing in the process? Multiple things, probably. We're building up that class consciousness. We're building up, mutual aid networks. We're propagandizing. We're converting people, and we're engaging in the class struggle.
And we're doing the kind of, I guess, more social justice side of it, of like teaching people about like gender identity and teaching people about racism and things like that. So hopefully, like, when that revolution comes, people are more informed of those issues, right?
Well, yeah, I think it's more than just teaching people about it. That's an important part. That's all we do here. We don't really do much else besides just talking about it. But in engaging in the class struggle, I think one of the big things I took from our episode of a queer theory was that engaging in the class struggle, like, and showing up to help other oppressed groups, we're all oppressed by the same bad guy, right? To show up to their struggle, to show up to whatever they're organizing for, and stand in solidarity with them in that intersectionality, but not just like in an awareness thing, but like in an actually on the ground, side by side with them sort of thing. Like, I think that's the bigger component. That's where we like develop not just our class identity, but the real understanding that we are on the same side and that our struggles are tied up together.
I think maybe that's what I meant by teaching too, is showing that, yeah, like these interests are aligned. Absolutely. And one way to do that is definitely by like showing up for other people that don't look like you.
Yeah. And you don't want to be, like you were saying earlier, you don't want to be, I think it's class reductionist or something like that, where it's just, I'll only solve the economic things and then everything else will melt away. That's not adequate.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. And it's a long road to hoe, but like you got to put in the work to build those alliances and to build up, not alliance, solidarity, a huge fusion of everyone who capitalism stomps down into the ground. And so by the time we've done that enough to where we end up with an anarcho-communist society in at least part of our country or wherever it pops off, that area that was, successful enough to start an anarchist commune, to start a worker state or whatever, I don't think they're going to have as much problem with reactionary racists and stuff.
Yeah, because there's so many of them, and odds are, depending on your country and your state or whatever, it's probably a diverse enough area that they're like, yeah, duh, we're all showing up for each other. If you put everyone together, that's an inherently diverse group of people.
Yeah, and I think, this is more of a modern phenomena. We look back at historical examples and we say, well, that didn't happen wherever else, but they were they didn't quite have some of the awareness of, they did have elements. We spent a lot of time talking about the long history, struggle for gay rights, for example. So they had some awareness of it, but I guess they just didn't have as much of an awareness of some of these issues, especially in gender and things like that.
It wasn't what was highlighted in, I think, maybe the leadership of certain movements, and also in the history of how that is talked about today.
Yeah, that's true. A good aspect of it to mention there is the leadership part. That's a good point, is that, it's important to have those grassroots connections. If you get too separated, if you're too much focused on just that representative democracy side without that input, then you're not going to realize oh, hey, I'm older person with I haven't been educated on these issues or something, and you don't realize that you're behind where the people are.
To me, I think a big component of making sure we don't backslide into anything reactionary, or we don't let any, we were talking about earlier, shitty ideas or, discriminatory ideas take place, is a robust, education and propaganda machine. And how do you do that? How, because I think the immediate question I get whenever I'm well, you have to have education to have informed voters is, well, then who's deciding on what the education is?
Yeah. Good point. So I think the Marxist-Leninist approach, the Maoist approach, is probably stronger here in terms of its solutions, because, you just do it. So you
have it. You pump it out.
Yeah. So under the guidance of your vanguard party that has the correct line on what should be our revolutionary approach, then they're going to go and they're going to put it together. The Politburo is going to say, hey, this is our education secretary. This is, and they will vote within the party and stuff, and then go with it, democratic centralism. And then they're going to put together, the Soviets didn't have a problem with convincing the vast majority of their people that the Soviet project was something to support, and they did that with very meager resources compared to our modern times. I think they were successful at that. Cuba, Vietnam, these are also examples of states that did, and they have a lot of propaganda. I get it.
We do too.
Yeah, if you're not used to seeing, I guess, red communist propaganda or whatever, it can look kind of wild, and you're like, whoa, that's propaganda. But you're right. We live among a lot of it all the time.
It's just owned by some guys instead.
Why I said that their approach is stronger is because what do you do in the anarchist situation?
You then have to agree what the education is, which is another consensus requirement.
Sort of, yeah. You can do different approaches at the same time. So you could say, okay, well, this is going to be, the People's Commune School number one. And then, that's where your anarcho-communists, your ones that really want the full people's experience go. And then if you have people who are a little bit more conservative or whatever, they're still mutualists or something. I mean, they're still
Yeah, they're still there. They didn't like go pack up and live in the wilderness.
right. Yeah. But, if they want to do something else, or maybe if some group, you have a segment that wants to do a more religious, there's room for them to do that too. I feel like you do have to get into a debate about, okay, well, how much resources are we going to devote to these things? And that could be trickier to maneuver. Part of why I lean more towards the more decisive, maybe, Marxist-Leninist side of it.
Yeah, it's a little more cut and dry. Like, yeah, you put out the information that will, like, not lead people, because that doesn't sound right. Because, again, the people putting out the information are also elected. It's not like they're, like, mustache-twirling randos,
Yeah, they're who the people chose. But you're saying, so what you're doing there, you're showing them, like, this is what we're doing, not like we as a separate government from you, but like you are like taking part in this, right? Through all those democratic processes that we have of you getting a say in your workplace or your school, getting to pick your leaders, or getting to contribute in your community organizations, your CDRs or whatever. You're showing people not just like the achievements of their great country that they can applaud, but like the achievements of them,
Here's how you impacted it too.
Yeah. I think that's a powerful thing to like get people on that side, is like to truly, not like we try to do, is like, well, the government is you, but like to actually make that the case.
I think we should always be able to look back and agree on like the big ticket items of like, hey, we're not capitalists. Hey, we're going to provide for our people. Like, hey, we're not going to be discriminatory. Like, you can have your rights. Don't fuck with other people's rights. Like, those are super basic rules that, like, I think we can all agree on.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to what we were saying about the long journey we have to get to this point. Is that's one of the things we have to make central to our revolutionary project, is the liberation of people from capitalism necessarily entails their liberation from oppression on the basis of who they are, right? Like, not just their economic position, but whatever groups they're a part of too.
What is our ideal formula, I guess, for democracy / decision making in general? I feel like I kind of just accidentally gave mine away. It's just like, agree on the basic shit and then direct democracy the rest of it as best you can. What do you think?
Well, how much would you direct democracy? What all do you think is best done that way?
I mean, I think this also depends on the size of the place you're working with. If you were in an independent commune, you're just like a smallish neighborhood or even a small city, then yeah, I think you could keep it all local. But like in reality, you're probably interfacing with other groups. So I think even in a federated situation, you'd still want to like have some representatives that can speak on your behalf, right?
Generally, I think, yeah, the higher you go up in terms of scale, the more representation you need versus direct.
I think it's like, keep it as local as you can, unless it's like a really big fucking ticket item of like, hey guys, we're going to change our constitution, or we're going to change like a big idea, then maybe that one goes national. But in the middle, maybe you can go more representative, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that even with big stuff like that, you can have an element of, they're not 100% mutually exclusive, right? Or like a zero-sum game between them. I like the Cuban example of like, we can, at the local level, have all these meetings and I mean all these meetings across the country, not like a meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday sort of thing. But like, we have the chance to give our feedback. I mean, America has like paltry versions of this when they're changing like the zoning of something or just bullshit like that at the city. They don't tell you about it, and it's just like
the most boring thing imaginable.
You can come do, and you can come do public comment or whatever for this sort of this environmental review or whatever, and it's like no one goes, or like 3 people go. I don't know. It's very inaccessible and seemingly way less relevant than actually taking part in this nationwide process, but still at that local level. I don't know. I think there's there's a way to do both.
Yes, that's right. So like even if this system had a representative component of, all right, I elected my local guys and now some of those people are going to be on the national level. That doesn't mean they just get to do whatever they want. They say, okay, I just got elected. I'm going to propose this, but I'm also going to take it back to my people and see what they think.
All right. What else do we think about how we would do democracy in the future utopia that we're building? I like the idea of local as much as you can, and then national things that you're doing, and you're electing your your national assembly representatives or delegates to do coordinating between the different communes or the different provinces of your worker state, right? Still getting that local feedback. What else? What other elements are we?
We're very into the mass line, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. I am for sure. I think it's a way to like not go off the rails. Think about it. It's like you don't want to get too full of yourself, isolated in your government building, and you never see like,
the real people,
the real America, or the real wherever you're from.
I mean, I think that's the basics for me. I think I like the idea of these kinds of ways to make sure everything does stay on the rails. And again, hopefully, like you got this far, like everyone should be on board to some extent. Like everyone, maybe a few weirdos, but whatever. Like they have either fled or like maybe got a little bit not here anymore. Or they're shunned, or there's not enough of them to do anything. Like hopefully that is taken care of. So
Dave and Dan are living in exile.
They're living inside the van now. Poor things.
Yeah.
They've eaten their spare tire.
Yeah, that's a good point is, how far we've gotten. We're usually going to be talking about still problematic stuff. People will still have some racism, but we're talking about, racism or transphobia or whatever it is that they have, and probably a smaller degree than like outright full on racism like we think today or whatever,
yes.
Right? So people who just like more need to be called in or whatever, if you're using that language. But what I mean, I guess, is that it's the old, I think it's Proudhon who had the quote of, I dream of a future society that will execute me as a reactionary.
Right? Ugh.
You want it to be that far to where, people are moving to where eventually we're the grizzled old, like people with the retrograde views compared to what people are doing in the future.
If I want to date an android grandpa, you're just going to have to get behind it.
Yeah.
I, for one, welcome my robotic in-laws. Okay, no, but I think that's a great point. Recognizing like how far a society has come. Like, I think it's okay to be like really proud of that and like not like be gross and like nationalist about it, but like I think there's value in saying like reminding people like, hey, like we fucking did that really hard thing. Like, let's keep doing some difficult things together.
Oh yeah. And nationalism, why is it so bad? It's because it supports capitalism and imperialism and everything like that, and it puts down other countries in a way that like opens up your mind to the acceptability of exploiting them or of killing them because they're not as good as you. That's why nationalism is bad. Nationalism in a communist state, in an anarchist commune, whatever you got, like that's good in that way. It's
fine.
It's just pride.
Yeah.
Right. It's not saying
that's like just solidarity.
Saying like these capitalist nations are bad and stuff, yeah, but it's not saying like let's go exploit them, let's go kill them or anything like that. It's just like maybe let's protect ourselves against them in that sense. But domestically, it's like look at, like you were saying, look at what we did, look at what we're still going to do. Reminding people of the mission of human liberation that we were on in the first place, that got us to this point, and that will carry us, however, to whatever brave gay future we have ahead of us.
And I mean, I know I spent a long time being like, well, you can't just say economics is going to get rid of all social problems. There is a component, though. Like, you can absolutely see a connection between like racial or reactionary movements and like economic situations. I think even like the current unfortunate trend of transphobia is also just a way to distract us from how like shitty fucking everything else is. It's a way to get people angry and to feed them this misinformation about like medical transition as a way to scare them into voting for people.
Oh yeah, it's kind of a boomer comic thing, but like it's just a little one panel with the plate with the cookies. You ever seen that one?
Let me see. I'll look it up. Cookie plate comic. Oh, is it The Foreigner Wants Your Cookie?
It's like that, anytime they get into a tight spot, right, and the economy's not doing so well, it's easy for them to pit us against each other. Definitely.
Put us against each other domestically and internationally, too, of like, oh, it's the bad guy's fault, and that's not going to be a thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, hey, we didn't end on a downer this time. I feel kind of hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, the downer is that we've got a long way to go, I guess. But that's not. I mean, it's not so bad. Think about all the improvements we'll make along the way.
Yeah.
If you don't burn up first.
Yeah. Shut up. Come on, we were so close.
Hey, you have to have some sort of a wild optimism to be a communist, to be an anarchist, right? Like, you have to believe in a better world against whatever odds you're actually seeing on the ground. You still have to, believe it's possible somehow.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about last week kind of the fascist inherent view of like people are bad and have to be kind of controlled and they're only as good as what they can produce. And I think, we're the opposite of that. We have to believe that people have inherent value and we should help them. And we got to do whatever that takes. And good luck out there.
Yeah, people are good and we are trying to free them. And even people that like seem bad, a lot of times they have such a potential to do good. The system traps them or they, has hardened them into whatever position they're in now. And that could change. And you're trying to free them too, Like they said in the young Karl Marx, all men are brothers, right?
That's true. That's true.
Trying to get there.
Well, what are we doing next week? In the meantime, before our beautiful utopia, what are we learning about?
Next week, we're going to do a bio episode on a fellow who has, featured quite a bit in our show so far, but is now going to get the spotlight for a while. This would be the Man of Steel, Joseph Stalin.
One of our most requested topics, I would say.
Okay, people want to know about Mustache Man?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we'll talk all about Papa Joe.
No, I don't want that.
We'll dive into it, the good and the bad. Remember he did some bank robbing. That was cool.
I like that. I wish he had just stuck to bank robbing.
It would have been problematic once they were like...
Oh, I guess, yeah. Well, no, he could go to other countries and rob their banks. That'd be an international bank robber.
It's pretty good. That sounds like a Bond... I'm sure one of the Bond villains was just like a Soviet...
Oh, I'm sure.
...bank robber, but like did it with a diamond suit or something.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know. With space lasers.
Okay, great. I'll get my my strike writing pen out. I'll bring out my big list of Christine's no-nos and take a look through
bring
it.
a few. Yeah, bring a few pens. You might need them.
I'll run out of ink. Like, ooh, that was also bad.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of that. Now, that said, of course, we're not in the business of hit jobbing people or tossing everything that they did out because they were heinous in certain aspects.
You gotta look at the whole picture. Great. He was very handsome in that one photo. I'll give him that.
Oh, yeah, that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look up young Stalin guy. He's surprisingly hot. It's upsetting.
All right. Well, that's it for today then.
All right, let that picture tide you over.
Catch you later.
All right, bye, y'all. Hey there, comrades. Just jumping in to remind you of all of our social media. We are on Twitter at teachcommunism, Instagram at teachmecommunism. You can shoot us an email. That's teachmecommunism@gmail.com. Any of those places are good to send us an episode suggestion or a question. anything you think would be useful feedback for us, or just your admiration. If you want to admire us in a public manner, and you should, you can go to Apple Podcasts to give us a review. It is the best way to help people find the show. Love when people write and review us. Please do both. We are also on YouTube, if that's how you prefer to listen to podcasts, or if you know someone that's the only way they'll listen to podcasts, send them to our page. And we have a Patreon. For $5 a month, you get access to our notes for each week's episode, including the backlog of notes, which is a very handy resource for up-and-coming commies. And at the end of the year, all of the funds from Patreon will be given to local mutual aid in the DFW area. So, ain't going to line our pockets. Finally, we have merch. Check us out at TeePublic. You can find shirts and I believe also stickers and magnets and all kinds of fun stuff with catchphrases from the show or episode art, stuff like that. The link to that store is in the show notes, so check that out. Okay, that's all the internet. Join us next time for another episode of Teach Me Communism, where the class struggle is always in session. Bye, y'all.